So it's time for Momentum at the Movies. So, ladies and gentlemen, every year we take a handful of recent movies from the past year, like starting at this time last year, and we connect them to the scriptures, and we just say, what can we learn about God through the plot of this movie? So, by round of applause, how many of you have seen the original Top Gun, 1986? A lot, okay. How many of you have seen the sequel, 2022, Maverick? Okay, that's a lot. All right, so it's a fun movie. For those of you who've seen it, I went in a little skeptical because everyone was saying this is the best movie of the year. It's so good. No one said it was okay. Everybody was like, it's the best. It's incredible. So I went in kind of with low expectations, like I'm not going to like it. And I was like, dang, that was really good. So it's a great, fun movie. Most people are considering it the film of the year. Not too many spoilers this morning, but I will kind of get you up to pace if you don't know much about the movie. So in the original Top Gun, 1986, back when I had big hair and my overalls were only latched on one side, okay, 1986, Lieutenant Pete Maverick Mitchell was this uber confident, really cocky naval aviator, AKA a fighter pilot for the Navy. And he was is played by Scientology's own Tom Cruise. Maverick had a best buddy in that film whose name was his wingman, and it was his best buddy. His name was Goose. That was his call sign. And so when they were flying together and Maverick needed some feedback from his wingman, he would say, what? Talk to me, Goose. Yeah, thank you very much. So he'd say, talk to me, Goose. And so I say that all the time. I don't even realize I was saying. The other day, someone refilled my salsa at the restaurant. And I went, oh, talk to me, Goose. And Zion was like, oh, Top Gun Maverick, or whatever. I was like, I don't even realize I said it. So to talk to me, Goose. So Maverick and Goose together are sent to Top Gun. And Top Gun it's basically a school or a program for the best of the best of the best fighter pilots. And so Goose in the first film dies in a freak accident. Spoiler alert, you've had 30 years, okay? He dies in a freak accident while they're flying together, and the Navy takes a look at it and says, Maverick was not at fault at all. But Maverick he feels responsible still. He can't quite shake this story, losing his buddy Goose, losing his wingman, and he loses his confidence. He thinks about leaving Top Gun, but it just hangs there in the past. In fact, in the original film, several times in different ways, someone gives him the message, you have to move on, you have to let him go. And so Maverick even thinks about quitting Top Gun. Well, now it's the sequel, 30 years later, and much Botox later, and the Navy has been given a mission. I'm just being honest, all right? The only lie this morning you're going to hear is right here, actual size. That is a lie. That's a lie. I'm just going to tell you straight up. Everything else, truth. All right, so this is 30 years later. The Navy has been given a mission. The Navy has been given a mission to destroy an unsanctioned uranium enrichment plant that sits in this deep depression in a deep canyon. And so it's well defended. It's going to take two pilots that each hit a perfect shot to destroy it, one to eliminate a barrier, the second one to destroy it. And so a guy from the previous film whose call sign was Iceman, played by Val Kilmer, you daisy if you do, and he's now the admiral. He is the admiral, and he tells the Navy, bring in Maverick. And so the idea is Maverick is brought in to train now these young fighter pilots, the best of the best of the best, in Top Gun for this specific mission. Now, ultimately, Maverick has to pick 4 young pilots to send to that mission, which seems impossible and seems like suicide. The more they talk about it, the more like, no one's coming back from this. I mean, we aren't going to be able to do it or accomplish it. And no one's returning home from this mission. But he has to pick 4 out of this school to go do this mission. And so it's going to require the ultimate sacrifice. Now, the plot thickens when it's soon revealed that one of Maverick's new students at Top Gun, his call sign is Rooster. And Rooster is the son of Goose, his best buddy that he lost years ago. And so it's Maverick's late buddy from the original story. And so there's a lot of this mysterious tension between Maverick and Rooster. And the other pilots, at times, they'll see them talking and maybe having a heated discussion, but because of the sound of the planes out in the aircraft carrier, they can't hear what they're arguing about or what they're getting into it about, but they're kicking dust at each other like a manager and an umpire, like, what is going on? And so nobody really knows for a while what their deal is. But here's the deal. Rooster is upset for two reasons at Maverick. He still blames Maverick for his father's death, and you see that in the trailer. Rooster says to him, my dad believed in you, and I'm not going to make the same mistake. So he blames Maverick for his dad's death. But then the other thing is he's also upset with Maverick because Maverick has purposefully impeded his career as a pilot by pulling his application from the U.S. Naval Academy. And he's done it on purpose. There's some reason that Maverick is impeding him. And so eventually at one point in the film, Maverick reveals to his love interest. The reason that's been happening is because Rooster's mom, before she passed away, made him promise that he wouldn't let Rooster become a pilot. Like, man, I don't want him to become a fighter pilot. I don't want him to die the way his father did. I don't want that to happen. So she made Maverick promise that Rooster wouldn't become a fighter pilot. And Rooster's totally unaware of that promise made to his mom by Maverick. So this is the deal. Maverick has this dilemma. He doesn't want to hold Rooster back anymore in his career as a naval aviator, but he also doesn't want to send him into this extremely dangerous mission that looks and feels like suicide. And so the main factor weighing him down in that decision is Goose. Years ago, his best buddy who died, I don't want this to happen again. Goose. It's in the past, and he's haunted by it. So there's this cool scene where Iceman, Val Kilmer, calls Maverick to his home. And Iceman has throat cancer. He can't even talk. He can a little bit. It's very, very painful. So he types messages on a computer screen to communicate with Maverick, and they talk. And they start talking, and it's pretty clear, like, this might be near the end for Iceman and in his life. But they communicate back and forth. Maverick talks, he types. And eventually, Iceman types the words, I want to talk about work. And Maverick knows exactly where this is going. And talking about his old buddy Goose, he says, don't ask me to send someone else to die. Send me. Like, let me lead and be one of these 4 pilots that goes into battle. Let me lead it. Be one of the ones that has to hit a bullseye target. Let me go and spare someone else, and let me lead 3 other pilots. Let me go, basically. And Iceman typed some very insightful words on his screen to Maverick. It's time to let go. That's his message to Maverick. It's time to let go. Let go of what? Well, he's got to confront the ghosts of his past, or he's never going to move forward in the present with this mission. Like, what is Iceman talking about? What's Maverick still holding on to? The past. Guilt from the past. Still carrying this burden from the past, and it's keeping him from accomplishing his mission right now in the present that is so important. Now, looking back through history, most Christians agree that pretty much the greatest Christian that ever lived in history was this guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul. The person who most closely followed Jesus and obeyed Jesus sacrificially and leaned on the grace of God for the forgiveness of his sins. But before Paul became a Christian, he was a dynamic young leader in the Jewish religion, Judaism. And so, in fact, in his religious zeal for Judaism, Paul used to persecute Christians. And so at times, I think once Paul became a Christian, I think he really struggled with the past. I think there were times where it came to mind where he was just like, man, it is so hard to leave that behind me. And one hint of this is found in 1 Corinthians 15:9, where Paul says this. He's writing to Christians, I am the least of the apostles, those specifically sent by Jesus out into the world with his story. I'm the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. And so this is like a little hint of things that sometimes came to his mind about his past, pre-Christian Paul. Like he reflects on his complete unworthiness to be on a mission of God out into the world. And so he felt like the reason he was particularly unworthy was because of how he hurt Christians, men and women, and persecuted the church of Jesus. I mean, Scripture tells us that he imprisoned them, he beat them, and he even voted for them to be executed at times. And so later as a Christian, Paul, he felt the gravity of that. Like, this is who I used to be. This is what I used to do. I hurt people. I hurt women because they said, I love and want to follow Jesus. I hurt men and voted for their deaths. I mean, he feels this gravity from his past animosity toward God's people and the violence against them. And so he struggled with the way he hurt them and even had a hand in killing innocent Christians back in the day. In fact, elsewhere he writes to Christians and says, I am the chief of sinners. So this morning, if you got something you're like weighing you down and you're like, man, I'm pretty bad. I mean, I don't even know if I'm allowed to show up at church. The guy who wrote the scripture that we're talking about today is like, I'm worse than you, dude. I'm the chief of sinners. That's how Paul felt. Like, man, no one was more disqualified from the kingdom of heaven than me. No one was more disqualified from a relationship, fellowship with the Almighty God than me. But Paul always in those passages ends up heading a direction that uses his past as an opportunity to magnify God's amazing grace. He would use the darkness of his past as a way to say, man, God's grace is so amazing. His forgiveness is so amazing. And I think he really had to, when those thoughts came to mind from his past, he really had to trust in God's matchless grace and focus on Jesus dying on the cross really paid for my sins. It really paid all of the penalty, every last bit of it, for what I did and who I used to be. And I believe that God can still use my life on mission in this world. Now, one more passage from Paul I want to go to, and this is kind of our key for today. Philippians chapter 3. How did Paul keep from living a life just with regret? How did he keep from living a life where he just becomes a recluse in his house watching Netflix and hanging out? You know, how did he do that? Like, how did he still go out, get out in the world, you know, do what God had called him to do and to be on mission, what he calls every Christian to do and be on mission? What did Paul say to himself at times when he was struggling with the past? I think we get a hint of it in Philippians chapter 3, where Paul writes this. He says, one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So this is the imagery he's using here is of a runner, is of an athlete, and I'm looking ahead. I'm not looking back all the time at what's behind me, who's behind me. I got to focus on the prize. I got to focus on the goal ahead, which is Jesus. And knowing Jesus, elsewhere in this passage, he says, I want to know Jesus. And so when you read this, doesn't it look here like we're tapping into a little bit of Paul's self-talk? Like, doesn't that feel a little bit like this is a pep talk that Paul maybe has given himself hundreds of times when he's reminded of his past? Like, he's like, man, I forget what is behind and I press on toward the goal, which is knowing Jesus and going to heaven because what Jesus has done for me on the cross. So I'm putting all my trust in him, all my weight on him, all my faith in him. And in the context, to be fair, earlier in Philippians 3, Paul is kind of listing his religious credentials. He's kind of saying, if I was going to brag, this is what I would say. And he talks about like, but I'm forgetting what's behind me. Even the things that look like to my credit. But because he's like, the things I did to my credit in my religious zeal were actually defiantly against God and his people, but I always thought I was Mr. Super Religious. And so he's like, man, I forget what's behind me, my religious achievements in Judaism, whatever I've accomplished so far as a follower of Jesus, and my past mistakes. I forget what is behind me. The only thing that matters is the present and pressing on I want to know Jesus. And he just keeps focused on that. Now, I got to be very clear about this passage. Paul is not saying, I've messed up so bad that I got to work my butt off to get to heaven. That's religion. That is not at all what Paul is talking about here. He is talking about a relationship with Jesus. He's saying, I've messed up so bad that I've got to keep my eyes on Jesus, keep remembering amazing grace, keep remembering the cross of Jesus, that I've put faith in him, that I put all my weight on him, that I trust him to have paid for my sin on the cross. Therefore, I'm going to lean on Jesus, focus on him, because if I keep looking back in the race at the guilt and what I did in the past, it just might destroy me, because I was awful. I was terrible. I was so lost and violent and wicked. Isn't it crazy? I know I'm talking to some human beings out here. So isn't it crazy how much we can get fixated on the past? Like, you can grow up thinking, I'm not going to do that when you're young. I'm not going to do that. And then something happens. You're like you can't stop looking back. Like, we get fixated. And it really is, for some of us, a temptation to just fixate on the past. And you need, if that's the truth for you, then you need to hear Iceman's message. It is time to let go. You need to hear Paul's message. Forget what is behind you and press on toward the goal of knowing Jesus and going to heaven because of the cross. Sticking with the movie theme, but in a totally different genre. How many of you know who Uncle Rico is? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that looks like what I looked like in 1986. This Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. By the way, 16 years ago, this was the second movie I preached on back in the day. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Vidal Sassoon. I mean, this is old school. So this is Uncle Rico. And Uncle Rico lived in the past. He was like, man, back in 1982, I used to be able to throw a pigskin a quarter mile. I could throw a football over those mountains. This is Kip Dynamite that's over here. He's got a little bit of a lisp, and he's Napoleon Dynamite's brother. And Kip Dynamite's like, are you serious? Like, oh, man, I'm dead serious. He's like, I'm dead serious, man. I used to be able to throw the pigskin a quarter mile. He says, watch this. And he picks up a big, juicy steak from his plate that's sitting behind him on the steps, and he wings it through the air at Napoleon, who's coming on a bicycle out in the street, and just blasts him in the face. And it's like, that's his way to show off his arm strength from back in the day. And then he goes on, he says, man, if Coach would have put me in during the state championship, we would have been champions. I know it. I know, no doubt in my mind. I'd have gone pro. I'd be making millions of dollars. I'd be sitting in a hot tub with my soulmate right now. I mean, he has all this stuff from back in the day because of my arm talent. This is who I could have been. This is who I would have been. But it didn't quite go the way I wanted it to. And then he looks over at Kip. He says, Kip, I reckon you know a lot about cyberspace. Have you ever come across anything about time travel? And then he starts talking about time travel, and that becomes a theme through the rest of the movie. Why? Because he's fixated on the past. Like, all he can think about is, I wish I could go back and just change missed opportunities. I wish I could correct. I wish I could improve. You know, whatever happened, I wish I could go back and change, because my life would be so much different. And now, and maybe some of you, like Paul, looking back at his credentials and saying, I could brag about this stuff. Maybe some of you are stuck spiritually because right now you're just constantly reminding yourself of what you used to do that was good. Like, you might be like, man, I used to be such an encouragement to the people around me when I was in youth group back in high school. Man, I used to serve and lead in this way 5 or 10 years ago. Like, man, this is how I used to invest in people. This is how I used to impact people around me before that pesky pandemic started. And really the thing that's keeping you from moving forward is you're leaning too much on your credentials from the past. Like, this is who I used to be, this is what I used to do, but right now you're not on mission at all. Like, you're stuck, you're not moving forward, and that's keeping you. Those memories of your credentials, they're keeping you from moving forward in the present. And Iceman would say gently, as he did to Maverick, and Paul would say gently, as he does to us, it's time to let go. It is time to forget what's behind you. It's time to press on in the present to the goal of knowing Jesus and going to heaven. And I think it's even more tempting for most of us is more than the glory of the past. For more of us, it's usually the guilt of the past, right? Like there's something that happened. It might not even be something wrong. Sometimes it is sin against God, sin against people. Other times it's something that was a mistake. You didn't even mean to do it. It was an accident. It's not even like, but you're just weighed down by the guilt of the past. And Iceman would say, it is time to let go. Put behind you the things of the past. So as a pastor, as you can imagine, over the years, I have had so many people tell me, this is the reason I'm stuck right now in the present. Because of, and they go back and they reach back 5, 15, 25 years, and they dig up something and they say, this is why I'm spinning my tires right now. And I mean, the stories are so diverse. Over the years, man, I mean, I'm 27 years old now. The years of me doing ministry, the years of me doing, people say, man, I embezzled money. And not only did it embarrass me, it embarrassed my family, and my kids went to school with my face in the news about what I had done to steal money. And I got to live with that and deal with that. I don't know how to move on from that. Some people are like, man, I did something so gross, and it went public. And I just don't know how to deal with that. And then when I saw it, when it went public, when I knew my name was attached to that thing that I did, I realized how gross it was. And I just don't know how to move past. Or I lost my cool. I wasn't even a short-tempered person, but I lost my cool one time with my kid, and my kid's life is never going to be the same. Like, it was one mistake, it was one time, but it happened. Or I was hurting so bad in this period of my life that I'm so ashamed of what I did to medicate during that time because I was hurting so bad. And I look back and I can't believe the lengths that I went to medicate and to try to fill the void because I was just grieving so badly. And there are stories like that everywhere at Momentum. In fact, this morning as people are pouring in, I'm like, man, you know me, I know you. For some of you, there's another one. There's another one. There's another one of just people who have dealt with things like Paul did. Here's what I did or who I used to be. And every once in a while, those things come up and I've got to struggle through them. And this morning, you get to be Maverick and I get to be Ice Dan. And I get to look at you and just say, man, I've got to tell you, you've got a lot to offer. This all doesn't mean you can't ever be used by God again. Everyone at Momentum is a leader or a potential leader. And so you can have a chance to save lives around you. You can have a chance to accomplish an important mission, but it's time to let go. You have to look past that and say, I've got to move forward and stop staring back. There's a mental health expert named Dr. John Deloney who says this. He's got a couple PhDs, and he's a radio personality now. He says, you can't undo the past. There's a period at the end of that sentence. Any amount of strength that you will spend to go back and edit that sentence is a waste of energy. Redirect that energy toward living out God's mission for your life now. Whatever happened, there's a period at the end of that sentence. For most of these things, there's a period. It's done. It's over. And whenever we try to go back and edit that sentence and we just can't let it go, what happens is we're stealing energy from the present and for God's mission for us right now to be a friend, to be a parent, to be a spouse, to be a disciple of Jesus serving in the community. We're using energy from the present to try to go back and edit something that happened in the past that has a period on it. It is done. There's no going back. It is absolutely over. And all of us have some past mistakes or situations that just can't be edited in any way. A broken relationship, a bankruptcy, an arrest, a DUI, a felony, a car accident. Like, they're just things that we can't go back and change ever. You know, sometimes it's something that might seem simple to other people, but it might be the way that you treated your kids as a parent. But there's a period at the end of their childhood if they're grown. Or flip that, maybe it was the way you treated your parents as a kid. Like, man, and now my dad's gone, and I just feel like I didn't appreciate him. All I did was give him grief and make his life. Man, there's a period at the end of that sentence. You can't go back and edit it, and it's not going to help you at all in the present to continue to burn energy thinking about what happened in that past completed sentence. It is time to let go. Forget what is behind you. Focus on knowing Jesus and winning the battle and receiving the reward of heaven. You know, Maverick can't go back and be like, man, I just wish I could go back and have protected Goose from that situation. The Apostle Paul, he couldn't go back and be like, I'm going to go to Stephen, the first Christian martyr, who Paul was there giving approval for him to be killed, to be executed. He can't go back and be like, man, Stephen, I am sorry. Like, you were speaking up about your faith in Jesus, and I was trying to shut you up. And I voted for your death because of your faith. I am so sorry. It was because I was blinded by my own ambition. I was blinded by that. So all Paul could do was say is that sentence is over. I hate that I did that, but there's no way I can correct that now. It's over. I have to focus my energy on knowing Jesus. That's all I can do is focus on that right now. So you can say, based on the bankruptcy, the felony, the affair, whatever it is, you can say, okay, I am informed by my past. That means something about maybe how I should be careful in the future. I'm informed by my past, but I'm not defined by my past. I'm not going to walk around owning I'm a felon. I'm not going to walk around reminding myself constantly I'm a cheater. I'm not going to walk around constantly reminding myself I'm a liar. No. I'm informed by that. I'm careful because of that, but I'm not defined by that. It is time to let go. There's an old saying, maybe some of you have heard, is that there's a reason why rear view mirrors are much smaller than windshields. Have you ever heard that? Okay. I mean, that's so true. It's like, because you have to focus on the present. This is where I'm at right now and kind of where I'm going. It's the present and the future that I have to stay focused on. But if I'm constantly staring in the rearview mirror, just staring in it all the time, if I'm always looking in the rearview mirror, what's going to happen? I'm going to crash. I'm going to destroy myself. And you think it isn't going to affect how you're driving and how you're moving forward. But the more that you stare and fixate, eventually you focus on what's happening right now. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I was going off the road. I didn't realize I was about to slam into somebody. And so we're meant to live in the now and focus on God's current mission for our lives and what we're supposed to be doing with this one life you have. I got to focus on the present. When I was in college, my senior year, a professor gave me as a gift. He had been kind of mentoring me, and he gave me and a best friend of mine who he mentored, a day timer. Now, this is like a planner for the young people. Let me just explain. It's like your calendar app was printed out into a hard copy, and you could write appointments on the day and say, okay, I need to do this at 8 a.m. tomorrow or whatever. This is a day timer, okay? It was a large, heavy app to carry around with you everywhere you went that didn't fit in your pocket, okay? And so I was given a day timer, and one of the things that I will never forget is I moved on from my senior year of college. I went to an internship, Southeast Christian Church in Louisville. At that time, there was about 11,000 people there. Now there's like 23,000 people there. But I became an intern, and I got paid 5 peanuts a week. And I could share those at times when I was feeling generous with friends, but mostly I used those peanuts on myself because there weren't many. And so I had this day timer, and inside the front cover was an index card. And on that index card, I kept track of all of my debts to people because I didn't have any money. And I was like, one day I'm going to get paid, to have a full-time ministry. I'm going to have an actual job. I'm going to have like a 4-digit job at least, 4-digit salary. At least 4 digits. And so I'm like, I'm going to write these down. So I might have had on the card $50 I owe to this particular friend, maybe $500 I owe to my mom. Man, I got to pay her back one day. One day when I get a job and actually have a paycheck, I'm going to pay my mom back. But I remember a couple of the actual specific debts that were on there. And one of them was, there was a woman named Carolyn Firmoil. And she went to this church, and Carolyn Firmoil was a part of that church at Southeast. Again, big church. And one day we got a call from her, and we didn't know her, but 2 of the interns, me and a guy named Greg, this real tall guy that also was going to be a preacher, she invited us to her house, and she took us upstairs to her house, and her husband had just passed away. She wasn't terribly old or anything like that, but her husband had just passed away. And we went upstairs, and she took us into this room, and it was like, for us, a couple of nerds, it was like, oh, it was his library, his study, from where he'd prepare sermons for years upon years. And she said, I don't have any reason for keeping these books. Like, I need to get them out of my house, and I'd rather give them to a couple of young ministers, that if there's anything you want, you could have some of these. And me and Greg were both like, like, what? No way. Like, commentary sets. Biblical commentaries usually cost, like, I'm just making this, at that time, $300, $400 for a set. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he had commentaries and books. So we just start filling up our arms. And the whole time she was like, please take what you want. I mean, and so we were like, how much do you want for some of these books? She was like, honestly, I don't even know what they're worth. I mean, if you want to give me $50 to feel better, about yourself, that's fine. But you don't need to give me anything. Just take them and go. And so we both filled up our arms, and we're taking them out to like my 1989 Dodge Aries, filling up the back seat, putting them in there. And I wrote down on my index card, Carolyn Firmoil, SECC, Southeast Christian Church. And I put $50, $100 question mark. Just a gesture to say thank you so much. And when I can, I just want to give her a little bit of money to thank her for that. Well, years went on, and I moved to Washington, D.C. I got there, and one day, looking at my day timer and my debts, I was able to start $50, $500. Carolyn Firmoil. And I call Southeast Christian Church. Man, it's somebody I knew there. But like, hey, can you tell me what's the current address for Carolyn Firmoil? She gave me a bunch of books one day. I want to pay her for them, and I need to track her down. Man, Carolyn Firmoil, I don't know that name. Like, come on. I mean, there's only 11,000 people. Like, come on. Where is she? Did she move after her husband passed away? Does she still go to the church? No matter what I did, I could not track down Carolyn Firmoil. I kept talking to different people who had access to a database. Like, come on, I'm not going to creep on the woman or anything. I'm trying to give her some money. I don't know who she is. I don't know where she's at. Nobody knows who she is. We just can't track her down. Nobody knows her. Man, that ate me up. Because on that card, this is my debt to Carolyn Firmoil. $50, $100, if I could give her 25, anything, but to pay her for this. And man, it ate me up. I couldn't pay her back. And you know what I had to do? I had to throw away the freaking card. Right? Because I did everything I could to track her down and pay my debt to her, but she was gone. She was absolutely, I don't know if she lived in Louisville anymore. I don't know if she was alive anymore. I had to put it in the trash. And here's why I share this with you is just simply, some of you feel like you owe something to somebody who is gone. Some of you feel like you have a debt outstanding to someone who has moved away, lost contact. You don't have each other's numbers, all that stuff. You cannot pay your debt to them. You cannot. You can't ask them for forgiveness. But here's the problem with that all going on. Guilt is keeping you from growth. Memories are keeping you from your mission, your God-given mission, because whatever that is, it's still eating you up and consuming you. And all you can do is make it right with God. I'm going to make this right with God, and then I'm going to listen to Iceman's message. It's time to let go. Paul's message. I'm going to put this behind me and forget what's in the past. And I think a really insightful thought on this from Paul himself is Romans 12:18, where he says this: if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, whenever I've taught on this passage in the years past, I've always said, look at how many qualifiers are in this teaching from Paul. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And I think what Paul is saying here is, Christians, followers of Jesus, just do your best. Because why? Because sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes Carolyn Firmoil's gone, okay? Sometimes your father is deceased. Sometimes that person has moved away and you've lost touch. So just do your best, because sometimes it doesn't depend on you. They refuse to talk to you. They don't want to reconcile. They don't want to hear an apology from you. So if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. It is time to let go, Maverick. Burn the debt card. Make yourself right with God. If you can't do anything to apologize, then all you can do is make things right with God and move on. You just have to ask the question, have I done everything I can to live at peace with God? And the answer to that's very simple. Peace is made for you through the cross if you accept the cross. Like I trust, as Paul did, the cross pays for every last bit of my sin. Every last bit of it. And if I accept Jesus's penalty paid for me on my behalf, then I don't have to pay the penalty for it. That would be unjust for it to be paid twice. Jesus has already paid it. Why would I pay it again? God doesn't expect me to. And so if I believe and I turn to God and I'm baptized, oh man, I have peace with God. Like that price has been paid. And if I follow Jesus and I struggle, then it's as simple as saying I confess my sins to God as a discipline. I say, today, this is how I blew it, God. I did this. I lost my temper. I blew it, but I know the cross of Jesus still covers my sin. And you got to do your best to live at peace with people. And that might mean for some of you, I've got to forgive what they did to me. Or maybe there's some people that I need to apologize to if it's appropriate, that I need to go back and apologize and say, I was wrong. I was proud. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. Now, why is this so important? Well, the reason this is so important is because some of you, and most of you know who you are, you're stuck right now because of what happened back then. For some of you, the reason that you're a Sunday morning only person is because of something that happened back then. Like, I don't think God could use my life for God's mission in the world. Why would I move beyond Sunday morning attendance and singing some songs and, hearing some idiot preacher say some words, and then, why would I not go to another level? It's because of something back then. Like, some people are like, I just don't want to. It's not high in the priority list. Others are like, I would like to, but God couldn't use my life because of that. And you're looking in the rearview mirror. And for some of you, the very reason you're not stepping up to lead, this is why it's a big deal, is because of that. How could I ever lead? How could I ever influence? How could I ever impact? Because that is in my past. But Paul always used that stuff from the past to say, man, that's why God's grace is so amazing. He always used that as a way to glorify and magnify God's grace for others. And so you might say, man, that's the very reason, the thing in the past, why I'm not stepping up to apprentice as a Mo group leader. Because of that. Or to serve in Mo Kids. Or to invest in middle schoolers and high schoolers. And just like Maverick, your past is keeping you from accomplishing the important mission right now. And it's time to let go, to get unstuck spiritually in the present. Thank God Paul didn't let that stuff distract him from his mission, because there would be men and women who never became followers of Jesus, churches that were never started, letters that were never written that became New Testament epistles, books in our Bibles. If Paul would have been consumed by the murderer that he used to be, then he wouldn't have done all these things, and so many people wouldn't have been impacted. Similarly, you have to let go of the past to press on to God's mission in the future. There are Mo kids down in the basement who will never have a church mom because you didn't say, I can be used by God still. There are students at Amplify who will maybe go on and say, nobody ever got me at the middle school, high school ministry Amplify. Nobody ever got me. Nobody ever I was always overlooked because you weren't there, and you're the one that could have been. I would have connected with that kid, but I had this thing in my past. There are men who are trying to man up and picture what it looks fully like to be a single godly man in this world, or a godly husband or a godly father, and they need someone to emulate a little bit, to learn from, but you're saying, just because of this thing, because of this season, because of this mistake, or addicts who think that they have to keep their struggle secret, or new Christians who will never hear your wisdom in Mo group because you don't think you have anything to offer to a small group. The story of Samson in the Bible is really cool because it's about this ancient warrior back in ancient times who, times of champions and, that kind of stuff. But the Bible records a story in Judges 13 to 16. And Samson had a mission, and it was to rescue God's people, at that time Israel, from their enemies, the Philistines. They had been in bondage to the Philistines for 40 years at this point. So Samson dedicated himself to God. He set himself apart for God's use, and he did that voluntarily, and he took something called the Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow was him saying voluntarily, I won't cut my hair, I won't drink wine, and I won't come into contact with dead bodies. Those were the three elements. And so Samson had 7 long braids of hair that were basically, that was like the source of his divinely given strength, was his long hair. But eventually he's on mission for a while, but he starts manifesting bad character. He starts sleeping with prostitutes. He starts chugging wine. And those were things that he specifically told God he would not do. And so eventually he falls in love with this woman named Delilah. And some of you might recognize that name. And eventually he fell in love with her. And she became a spy for the Philistines and started trying to get his secret out of him. What is Samson's secret to his strength? This divinely given strength. He might have looked like me, a little puny guy, but he had divinely given strength. He might not have looked ripped. He was just a regular guy with divinely given strength, maybe. What's the secret? And so Delilah's trying to get the secret out of him until one night it says he told her everything. He said, I've been a Nazirite dedicated to God. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me. So that night, while Samson was sleeping, she had someone cut his 7 braids, and she yelled to wake him up, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he gets up to fight, but he doesn't realize the Lord has left him. His strength, his supernatural strength is gone. And so now he's stuck. He's just a regular guy. There's an old Christian hip-hop song I love, still have it in some playlists, that says of this moment that Samson went to sleep with braids but woke up with a fade. And I was like, oh, I love that. I love that. So it's gone. His strength is gone. His hair's cut. And so the Philistines blind him, and they make him a slave. They put him to work in a prison grinding grain. And it was this humiliating failure. He had failed God. He had failed his mission. But then there's this amazing verse at the end of that. It says this, but the hair on his head began to grow again. That's God's grace at the end of this story. Samson blew it big time, but the hair on his head began to grow again. Like, here's the point. Life continues. Life goes on. It's not the end of the story. Samson still has a chance to recover spiritually and accomplish God's mission for his life. That statement is a statement of God's grace. And it says in that story then that Samson looks up and he prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. And God used Samson to accomplish the mission that he originally gave him. Even though he had blown it so much and so many times, God's grace was still available to him. How do you bounce back from moral failure? How do you bounce back from a mistake? You look up, and Iceman's message is it's time to let go. Sometimes in the past when my kids were little, every once in a while they'd do something that was in little kid world a big deal, and they'd ruin the evening, but they'd be crying about it. They'd, maybe fighting with each other, whatever, and putting them to bed. One of the kids might just be crying in regret about how they ruined a fun evening or a trip to the zoo or whatever it might be. And my wife would calmly, very wisely at bedtime, she would remind them of Lamentations 3. And she would say, the evening's over. It's done, buddy. It's done. But the Lord's mercies are new every morning. Tomorrow, you get a brand new day to start all over again. The Lord's mercies, they're new every morning, and great is thy faithfulness. And so I just want to say to you, if you trust in the forgiving work of Jesus on the cross, the past is the past. It's done. What happened yesterday is over. Every morning is a fresh start. Every day is a new day. The hair on Samson's head began to grow again. It's time to let go. That's the hope we have if we trust in Jesus. And Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, that person's a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come. Man, at the end, the mission is so awesome in Maverick. I went and saw it a second time, and they were leading up to the mission, and I found myself leaning forward on my reclining seat at Cinemark, and my palms were all sweaty, and I was all pumped like, oh, man, this mission's so good. I can't wait to see it again. And it's really exciting. If you've seen it, it's really fun, but it only happens when Maverick allows himself to stop being weighed down by the past. He takes Iceman's advice. And for you, God has a mission for your life, and it's not about you. It's about his glory and his kingdom and people around you that need to be served and helped. But here's the thing about our mission. It's exciting, and it's not fiction. It's a true story. Lives can literally be saved when you realize the difference Jesus can make in someone's soul. And so if you focus on Jesus, you can break the power of the past by living in the present for the good of the future. And when Iceman says, man, Maverick, it's time to let go, Maverick's response is, I don't know how to. Here's one of the ways. Here's one of the secrets. Breaking the power of the past has everything to do. Breaking the power of the past has everything to do with you focusing on the mission of now. I want to know Jesus. Let's pray.